Who is this?
How did my husband turn my little secret into the moment I lost everything? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The apartment felt different that Tuesday morning, like the air itself had grown thicker overnight. I stood in our living room, adjusting my new red dress, the one I'd bought specifically because it hugged my curves in all the right places. Daniel sat at the kitchen counter, methodically eating his cereal while scrolling through his phone with mechanical precision. "What do you think?" I asked, doing a little spin that made the fabric swirl around my thighs. "I got it yesterday during lunch." He glanced up for maybe half a second. "It's fine." Fine. That's all I got. I'd spent 2 hours shopping, trying on different outfits, imagining his reaction. I'd pictured his eyes lighting up, maybe even him pulling me close and telling me how beautiful I looked. Instead, I got fine delivered with all the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. "Just fine?" I pressed, moving closer to where he sat. "I thought you might like the color. You always said red looked good on me." Daniel's phone buzzed against the granite countertop. He silenced it immediately, then pulled a small notepad from his shirt pocket and scribbled something down. From where I stood, I could make out "meeting personal" in his neat handwriting. "Sorry, what were you saying?" he asked, not looking up from his notes. The familiar sting of being ignored settled in my chest. This had been happening more and more lately. Daniel treating me like I was just another piece of furniture in our carefully decorated home. When was the last time he'd really looked at me? When had he last initiated a conversation that didn't revolve around bills or household maintenance? I walked to the counter and deliberately left my phone face up next to his coffee mug, the screen still glowing from a text I'd just received. Maybe if he saw that other people found me interesting, he'd remember what he was taking for granted. The printer in our home office hummed to life, breaking the silence. Daniel immediately stood up, leaving his half-finished breakfast behind. "I need to grab something," he said, disappearing down the hallway. I picked up my phone and glanced at the message that had just come in. "Hey babe, thinking about yesterday. Can't wait to see you again. Chris." My stomach fluttered as I quickly deleted the preview notification. Chris had always been good at making me feel wanted, even back in college when we dated briefly. Running into him at the coffee shop last month had felt like fate, especially when he'd immediately started flirting like no time had passed at all. It wasn't like I was doing anything wrong. We'd only had coffee a few times, and sure, there had been some harmless flirting, but Daniel's coldness was driving me to seek attention elsewhere. If he actually paid attention to his wife, maybe I wouldn't need validation from other men. Daniel returned carrying a thick binder labeled "Home" in his precise handwriting. He set it on the counter next to a stack of mail I hadn't noticed before. "What's all this?" I asked, gesturing at the paperwork. "Just organizing some things," he replied, closing the binder before I could see its contents. "I'll be working late tonight, by the way. Don't wait up." Another late night. Another evening of me sitting alone in our apartment, watching Netflix and wondering when my husband had become a stranger. I couldn't remember the last time we'd had dinner together, let alone an actual conversation about something meaningful. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mom. "Are you two okay?" Daniel seemed distant at Sunday dinner. Even my mother had noticed. The thought made my cheeks burn with embarrassment. How long had our marriage been falling apart without me realizing it? Or maybe I had realized it, but I'd been too proud to admit that my perfect relationship wasn't so perfect after all. "Everything's fine, Mom," I texted back quickly. "Just busy with work stuff." Daniel was already heading toward the door, briefcase in hand, and that mysterious binder tucked under his arm. He paused at the entryway mirror to straighten his tie. a tie I'd bought him for his birthday last year, back when I still believed small gestures mattered to him. "Have a good day," he said without turning around. "You too," I replied to his reflection. The door closed with a soft click, leaving me alone with the lingering scent of his cologne and the sound of the printer still running in the background. I walked over to check what it had been printing, but the output tray was empty. Strange. I was gathering my purse and keys when I noticed a yellow sticky note on the refrigerator that hadn't been there the night before. In Daniel's careful handwriting, it read, "Paper drop, 3 p.m. Paper drop? What kind of papers? And why was he being so secretive about everything lately? My phone rang, my sister Lisa's name flashing on the screen. "Hey sis," I answered, still staring at the mysterious note. "Amy, I just wanted to check on you. Daniel called me yesterday asking about your schedule. He seemed, I don't know, different. Is everything okay between you two?" My blood ran cold. Daniel had called Lisa. He never called my family members directly, especially not to ask about my schedule. What was he up to? "I'm sure it's nothing," I said, trying to keep my voice light. Maybe he was planning a surprise or something. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. Daniel hadn't planned a surprise for me in years, and the way Lisa described his tone, different, sent a chill down my spine. After hanging up, I stood in our silent apartment, surrounded by all the trappings of our life together. The couch we'd picked out during our first year of marriage, the coffee table where we used to eat breakfast on lazy Sunday mornings, the bookshelf filled with novels we'd promised to read together but never did. When had it all become so empty? The neighborhood cafe buzzed with its usual afternoon crowd, freelancers hunched over laptops, mothers pushing strollers, and retirees reading newspapers while nursing endless cups of coffee. I'd chosen a corner table where I could see the street, partly out of habit, and partly because I'd been feeling paranoid lately. Sarah arrived 10 minutes late, as always, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, and her designer handbag slung carelessly over her shoulder. We'd been best friends since college, and she was one of the few people I could talk to about anything. Or so I thought. Sorry, she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Traffic was insane. How are you holding up?" "What do you mean?" I asked, though I had a feeling I knew where this conversation was heading. Sarah studied my face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Amy, you've been acting strange lately. Distracted. And yesterday when you mentioned that guy Chris..." She trailed off, waiting for me to fill in the blanks. I felt my cheeks warm. Maybe I had been a little too enthusiastic when describing my coffee dates with Chris, but Sarah was my friend. She should be supportive, not judgmental. "It's not what you think," I said, stirring my latte unnecessarily. "We're just friends, old friends catching up. Friends don't usually make you light up the way you did when you talked about him." Sarah leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Amy, please tell me you're not doing what I think you're doing." The accusation hung in the air between us. I wanted to deny it, to tell her she was being ridiculous, but the words stuck in my throat. Because the truth was, I had been thinking about Chris more than I should. I'd been looking forward to our meetings more than I looked forward to coming home to Daniel. "Daniel barely acknowledges I exist," I said finally. "He comes home, eats dinner in silence, and spends the rest of the evening buried in paperwork or on his laptop. When was the last time your husband made you feel invisible in your own home?" Sarah's expression softened slightly, but concern still creased her features. "That doesn't mean—" "Chris makes me feel alive again," I interrupted. "He listens when I talk. He laughs at my jokes. He remembers things I tell him. When was the last time Daniel did any of those things?" "So you're having an affair?" The words hit me like a slap. "It's not an affair. We're just talking. Flirting, maybe. But that's all." "Amy." Sarah's voice carried a warning I'd never heard before. "You're playing with fire, and you're going to get burned." Before I could respond, movement outside the window caught my attention. A familiar silver sedan was pulling into the parking lot across the street. My stomach dropped as I recognized Daniel's car. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, following my gaze. "Nothing," I said quickly, but my heart was pounding. I just thought I saw someone I knew. Daniel's car disappeared around the corner, but the sighting left me shaken. What were the odds of him driving past this particular cafe at this exact moment? And why did I feel so guilty when I wasn't even doing anything wrong? My phone chimed with a calendar notification. Downtown, 4 p.m. I didn't remember setting that reminder, and I certainly didn't have any appointments downtown today. "I should probably get going," I said, gathering my purse. "Amy, wait." Sarah reached across the table and grabbed my wrist. "I'm saying this because I care about you. Whatever you think you're doing with this Chris guy, it's going to end badly. Daniel's a good man, and you're going to lose him if you keep this up." "Daniel wouldn't even care if I left," I snapped, pulling my arm free. "He's so wrapped up in his own world that he probably wouldn't notice if I disappeared for a week." Sarah sat back in her chair, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked at me like I was a stranger. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I know it," I said, standing up. "Trust me, I live with the man." As I walked toward the exit, my phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen, but underneath his contact info I noticed something odd. The call was showing up as private instead of his usual number. I let it go to voicemail. Outside the cafe, the afternoon sun felt too bright, too harsh. I fumbled for my sunglasses while walking to my car, trying to shake the feeling that Sarah's words had struck closer to home than I wanted to admit. My phone buzzed with a text from Chris. "Missing you already. Dinner tomorrow?" I started to type a response, then stopped. A woman walking past the cafe glanced at me with what looked like concern, though I couldn't imagine why. Did I look as rattled as I felt? Instead of responding to Chris immediately, I opened my voicemail to listen to Daniel's message. But there was no message, just 30 seconds of silence before the line went dead. Strange. I was about to put my phone away when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. There, in my purse next to my usual keys, was another key I didn't recognize. Silver, with a number stamped on it that meant nothing to me. How had it gotten there? And more importantly, what was it for? The paranoia I'd been fighting all week suddenly felt a lot more justified. Daniel's secretive behavior, the mysterious paperwork, the strange phone calls, and now this key that had appeared out of nowhere. My hands were shaking as I started my car. Sarah's warning echoed in my mind. "You're going to get burned." But as I drove home through the familiar streets of our neighborhood, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was already burning, and I had no idea how to put out the flames. The next morning at work, I couldn't concentrate on anything. My desk felt like a prison, surrounded by the usual chaos of our open-plan office, but all I could think about was that mysterious key and Daniel's increasingly strange behavior. "Amy, could I see you for a moment?" Ms. Green's voice cut through my racing thoughts. My supervisor stood beside my cubicle, holding a folder and wearing the expression she reserved for difficult conversations. I followed her to her corner office, trying to ignore the curious glances from my coworkers. "Is everything all right at home?" she asked once we were seated. "You've been late 3 times this week, and yesterday's Morrison report had several errors that aren't like you." Heat flooded my cheeks. "I'm sorry, Ms. Green. I've been having some personal issues, but I'll do better." "Personal issues?" She leaned forward slightly. "Amy, you're usually one of our most reliable employees. If there's something going on that's affecting your work performance, we need to address it." I wanted to tell her about Daniel's cold distance, about how sleeping next to someone who felt like a stranger was making me question everything about my life. Instead, I gave her the sanitized version. "My husband has been working late a lot lately, and it's creating some stress at home. I think he might be dealing with something he won't talk to me about, and it's making me anxious. Ms. Green's expression softened slightly. Have you tried talking to him directly about your concerns? He's not really the talking type, I said, which wasn't entirely untrue. Daniel had never been one for long heart-to-heart conversations, but lately he'd become almost completely uncommunicative. Well, I hope you can work things out, but Amy, I need you to understand that we can't have personal problems affecting the quality of your work. The Morrison account is too important. After she dismissed me, I returned to my desk feeling even more unsettled. I was barely back in my chair when I noticed Daniel walking past the large windows that separated our office from the hallway. He was carrying his laptop bag and that same mysterious binder from yesterday morning. What was he doing here? His office was across town, and he'd never mentioned having any business in this building. I watched as he disappeared around the corner, heading toward the elevator bank. Without thinking, I stood up and followed him, keeping enough distance that he wouldn't notice me. The elevator doors were already closing when I reached them, but through the gap, I caught a glimpse of Daniel pressing the button for the third floor. The third floor housed mostly legal offices and accounting firms. My heart started pounding as I waited for the next elevator. When I reached the third floor, the hallway was empty except for the sound of muffled conversation coming from behind one of the office doors. I crept closer, trying to make out voices, but the words were too muffled to understand. All I could tell was that Daniel was speaking to someone in low, measured tones, the same voice he used when he was being particularly careful about something. My phone vibrated with a text message. I glanced down and saw Chris's name. Can't stop thinking about our conversation yesterday. You deserve so much better than what you're getting at home. I quickly deleted the message, but not before feeling that familiar flutter of excitement. Chris understood me in a way Daniel never had. He saw me as more than just a wife who kept house and earned a paycheck. With Chris, I felt like the woman I used to be, confident, desirable, worth pursuing. Amy? I spun around to find Mr. Patel, Daniel's boss, standing behind me with a surprised expression. Oh, hi, Mr. Patel, I stammered. I thought I saw Daniel and wanted to say hello. He's in a meeting, Mr. Patel said, studying my face carefully. Actually, I'm glad I ran into you. How is Daniel doing lately? He seemed much more focused at work recently, but I've been wondering if everything's all right at home. More focused? That was interesting. Daniel had been distracted and distant with me, but apparently he was channeling all his attention into work. He's fine, I said automatically. Just busy with some personal projects. Mr. Patel nodded, but something in his expression suggested he didn't entirely believe me. Well, tell him I said hello. And Amy? Take care of yourself. You look a bit stressed. As he walked away, I realized how this must look. Me lurking in the hallway outside my husband's meeting, clearly agitated and making excuses. But I couldn't help myself. Daniel's secretive behavior was driving me crazy, and the more mysterious he became, the more I felt justified in seeking comfort elsewhere. I returned to my desk to find my computer screen showing a cloud sync notification. Several files had been automatically backed up, including some I didn't remember creating. When I clicked on the notification to see the details, I noticed that some of the files were labeled with dates and initials that didn't make sense to me. Having computer problems? Asked Jake from the cubicle next to mine. Just some weird sync issues, I replied, closing the notification window. But the incident left me feeling even more paranoid. First the mysterious key, then Daniel's secret meeting, and now strange files appearing on my computer. Was I losing my mind, or was something really going on? My phone rang, Lisa's number flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, not ready to deal with more questions about my marriage. But when I played the message back, her words made my stomach clench. Amy, call me back. Mom is worried about you and Daniel. She said he called her yesterday asking about your work schedule and whether you'd mentioned any new friends lately. What's going on? Daniel had called my mother, and he'd asked about new friends? My hands were trembling as I set the phone down. This wasn't paranoia anymore. Daniel was investigating me, checking up on me, asking my family members questions. But why? What did he suspect? And how much did he already know? I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to focus on work, but my mind kept racing through possibilities. Had someone seen me with Chris? Had Daniel found something on my phone or computer? Or was he just being paranoid for no reason? By 5 o'clock, I was exhausted from the mental gymnastics. As I gathered my things to leave, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, tucked into the side pocket of Daniel's jacket hanging on my chair, was a USB drive labeled Taxes in his neat handwriting. It was November. Tax season was months away. I stared at the USB drive, my mind racing. What kind of information was Daniel collecting, and why was he hiding it from me? Part of me wanted to plug it into my computer and find out, but a larger part was terrified of what I might discover. Instead, I carefully put the drive back exactly where I'd found it and headed home, the weight of too many secrets pressing down on my shoulders like a physical burden. Lisa's kitchen always smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, a combination of her favorite candles and whatever she was baking for dessert. Under normal circumstances, our weekly family dinners were the highlight of my week, a chance to relax, catch up, and remember what it felt like to be part of something bigger than my increasingly isolated marriage. Tonight felt different from the moment Daniel and I walked through the front door. "Amy!" "Daniel!" Lisa greeted us with her usual enthusiasm, but I caught the way her eyes lingered on Daniel's face, as if she was searching for clues about our relationship. Mom was already seated at the dining room table, her silver hair perfectly styled and her smile just a little too bright. Dad stood by the window, nursing a beer and pretending to watch the neighbors' kids play in their backyard. "How's work treating you, Daniel?" Dad asked as we took our seats. "Can't complain," Daniel replied, unfolding his napkin with mechanical precision. "Busy, but that's good." It was the same response he gave to every question about work, but tonight I noticed how carefully neutral his tone was, like he was reading from a script. "And how are things with you two?" Mom asked, her gaze bouncing between Daniel and me. "You both seemed a little quiet at church last Sunday." I felt Daniel's eyes on me, but when I looked at him, his expression was unreadable. "We're fine, Mom. Just the usual work stress." "Marriage takes work," Lisa chimed in, setting a casserole dish on the table. "Tom and I went through a rough patch last year, remember? But we talked through it." The emphasis she placed on "talked" felt deliberate, and I wondered what Daniel had said to her during that mysterious phone call. "Some things don't need to be talked to death," I said, reaching for the salad bowl. "Sometimes people just need space to figure things out." "Space can be good," Daniel agreed quietly, "as long as both people are being honest about what they need." The word honest hung in the air like an accusation. I looked at Daniel sharply, but he was focused on serving himself vegetables, his face giving nothing away. "Speaking of space," I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice, "Daniel's been working so late lately that I barely see him. Sometimes I feel like I'm living alone." Mom's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh? What's keeping you so busy, Daniel?" "Just some personal projects that need attention," he replied. "Nothing exciting." Personal projects. The same vague explanation he'd been giving for weeks. I was getting tired of being shut out of my own husband's life. "Maybe I should find some personal projects of my own," I said with a laugh that sounded forced even to my ears. "At least then I'd have something to do besides sit at home alone every night." Daniel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "You should do whatever makes you happy, Amy." There was something in his tone, a flatness that made my skin crawl. It wasn't anger or hurt or even annoyance. It was indifference, as if he genuinely didn't care what I did with my time. "Well, I've been thinking about reconnecting with some old friends," I continued, testing the waters. "You know, people who actually want to spend time with me." Lisa and Mom exchanged a look I pretended not to notice. Old friends can be complicated, Lisa said carefully. Sometimes it's better to focus on the relationships you already have. What if the relationships you already have aren't working? I shot back. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad cleared his throat and reached for his beer. Mom started fiddling with her napkin. Lisa looked like she wanted to disappear under the table. Daniel's phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at it, then stood up abruptly. "Excuse me, I need to take this." He disappeared into Lisa's home office, closing the door softly behind him. Through the thin walls, I could hear the low murmur of his voice, but I couldn't make out the words. "Amy," Mom said once Daniel was out of earshot, "what's really going on?" "Nothing's going on," I insisted. "Daniel's been distant and secretive, and I'm tired of being treated like I don't matter." "Marriage isn't about constant attention," Lisa said gently. "Sometimes people get busy or stressed, and they withdraw a little. That doesn't mean they don't love you." "You don't understand," I said, my voice rising slightly. "He barely touches me anymore. He doesn't ask about my day. He doesn't even look at me when I talk to him. I could disappear tomorrow, and he probably wouldn't notice for a week." "That's not true," Dad said quietly. "I've seen the way Daniel looks at you. He loves you, Amy." "Then why does it feel like I'm married to a stranger?" Before anyone could answer, Daniel returned to the table. His phone was nowhere to be seen, and his expression was even more controlled than before. "Everything all right?" Lisa asked. "Fine," Daniel replied, taking his seat. "Just work stuff." The rest of dinner passed in uncomfortable small talk. Daniel participated just enough to be polite, but I could tell his mind was elsewhere. When Lisa brought out dessert, he checked his watch and announced that we should probably head home soon. "Already?" Mom asked. "We haven't had coffee yet." "I have an early morning," Daniel said apologetically. "But thank you for dinner, Lisa. Everything was delicious." As we gathered our coats, I overheard Daniel speaking quietly to Lisa by the front door. "I'll handle it properly," he was saying. "I just need a little more time." Handle what properly? And why was he discussing it with my sister instead of with me? The drive home was silent except for the radio playing softly in the background. Daniel stared straight ahead, his hands relaxed on the steering wheel, while I tried to figure out what had just happened. "What did you mean when you said you'd handle it properly?" I asked finally. Daniel glanced at me briefly before returning his attention to the road. "Handle what?" "I heard you talking to Lisa. You said you needed more time to handle something properly." "I don't know what you're talking about," he said calmly. The lie was delivered so smoothly that for a moment I doubted what I'd heard. But I knew what I'd heard, and I knew Daniel was hiding something from me. When we got home, Daniel went straight to his home office and closed the door. I could hear him moving around in there, opening and closing drawers, the soft whir of the paper shredder, the clicking of computer keys. I stood outside the door for a long time, listening to the sounds of my husband doing mysterious work that apparently had nothing to do with me. When I finally went to bed, he was still in there, and I fell asleep to the sound of him making quiet phone calls to people whose names I didn't recognize. The maternity ward at St. Mary's Hospital buzzed with the controlled chaos that comes with new life entering the world. I'd volunteered to visit my cousin Jenny, who'd given birth to her first daughter 3 days earlier, but if I was being honest with myself, I had an ulterior motive. I'd invited Chris to meet me there. It wasn't planned exactly. We'd been texting more frequently, and when he mentioned wanting to see me again, the words had tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop them. "I'll be at the hospital visiting family this afternoon, room 314. Maybe you could stop by?" Now, standing in the elevator with a bouquet of pink roses, I was questioning my judgment. What kind of person brings their, whatever Chris was, to meet their family? But Daniel's coldness had been wearing me down, and I was desperate to feel wanted by someone, anyone. Jenny looked radiant despite her exhaustion, cradling baby Emma against her chest, while her husband Mark fussed over pillows and blankets. "Amy." Jenny's face lit up when she saw me. "I'm so glad you came. Where's Daniel?" "He's working," I said, the familiar excuse tasting bitter in my mouth. "But I brought these for you." As I arranged the flowers in a vase, my phone buzzed with a text from Chris. "On my way up. Can't wait to meet your family." My stomach fluttered with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. What was I doing? This was crazy, reckless, the kind of behavior that could destroy everything. But the thought of Chris's smile, his attention, his obvious desire to be near me, made me feel alive in a way I hadn't experienced in months. "So how are things with you and Daniel?" Mark asked, settling into the chair beside Jenny's bed. "You two seemed a little off at the barbecue last month." "We're fine," I said automatically. "Just busy with work and other things." "Marriage is hard work," Jenny said, stroking Emma's tiny head. "But it's worth it when you find the right person." Before I could respond, there was a soft knock on the door. My heart jumped as Chris appeared in the doorway, holding a small bouquet of yellow daisies and wearing the charming smile that had first attracted me to him in college. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his eyes finding mine immediately. "Not at all," I said, my voice sounding strangely breathless. "Jenny, Mark, this is Chris. Chris, meet my cousin Jenny and her husband Mark." Chris moved into the room with easy confidence, offering the flowers to Jenny and congratulating Mark on becoming a father. He was everything Daniel wasn't: warm, attentive, present in the moment. "How do you know Amy?" Jenny asked, accepting the daisies with a puzzled smile. "We're old friends from college," Chris said smoothly. "We recently reconnected, and Amy's been showing me around the neighborhood. She's been a wonderful guide." The way he said "wonderful" made my cheeks warm. When was the last time Daniel had called me wonderful? When was the last time he'd called me anything other than my name? "That's nice," Mark said, but I caught the questioning look he exchanged with Jenny. "Are you new to the area?" "Just moved back from Chicago," Chris replied, moving closer to where I stood by the window. "Amy's been helping me remember why I love this city so much." His hand brushed against mine as he spoke, and I didn't pull away. The contact sent a thrill through me that I hadn't felt in years. "Well, any friend of Amy's is welcome here," Jenny said politely, though I could see the confusion in her eyes. We chatted for a few more minutes about safe topics: the baby, the hospital, the weather. Chris was charming and appropriate, asking all the right questions and saying all the right things. But underneath the polite conversation, I was hyper-aware of his presence beside me, the way he kept finding excuses to stand close, the way his attention never wavered from me even when others were speaking. "I should probably get going," Chris said eventually. "I just wanted to stop by and congratulate you on your beautiful daughter." He turned to me, his eyes holding mine for a moment longer than necessary. "Amy, thank you for inviting me. It was wonderful meeting your family." After he left, the room felt smaller somehow, like all the oxygen had been sucked out with his departure. "He seems nice," Jenny said carefully. "How long have you two been reconnecting?" "Just a few weeks," I replied, trying to sound casual. "It's been nice having someone to talk to." "Someone to talk to?" Mark's tone was neutral, but his meaning was clear. "Daniel's been working a lot lately," I said defensively. "Chris is just a friend who actually listens when I speak." Jenny and Mark exchanged another look, and I could practically see them filing this information away to discuss later. The thought should have worried me, but instead, I felt a reckless kind of satisfaction. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Maybe it would get back to Daniel, and maybe then he'd realize what he was losing. My phone buzzed with a text from Chris. "Your family seems lovely. Thank you for including me. You looked beautiful today, by the way." I was smiling at the message when another knock interrupted my thoughts. This time, Daniel appeared in the doorway, still wearing his work clothes and carrying his laptop bag. The blood drained from my face. "Sorry, I'm late," Daniel said, his eyes scanning the room. Traffic was terrible. "Daniel!" Jenny's face brightened. "I was starting to think you weren't coming." "I wouldn't miss meeting my new niece," he replied, but his voice sounded strange, too controlled, too careful. As Daniel approached the bed to admire the baby, his gaze fell on the yellow daisies Chris had brought. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. "Pretty flowers," he said quietly. "Amy's friend brought them," Jenny explained. "Chris, I think his name was. He just left a few minutes ago." Daniel's eyes found mine across the room. For a moment, I saw something flicker in their depths, hurt, maybe, or disappointment. But then it was gone, replaced by that same neutral mask he'd been wearing for weeks. "That was thoughtful of him," Daniel said evenly. The rest of the visit passed in a blur of awkward small talk. Daniel held the baby, made appropriate comments about how beautiful she was, and chatted with Mark about work and sports. But I could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a furnace. When we finally left the hospital, Daniel was silent as we walked to the parking garage. It wasn't until we reached our cars, we'd driven separately since I'd come straight from work, that he spoke. "Interesting afternoon?" he asked, his tone conversational. "It was nice to see Jenny and the baby," I replied, not meeting his eyes. "I'm sure it was." He paused, keys in hand. "Amy, if there's something you want to tell me, now would be a good time." The question hung in the air between us. This was my chance to come clean, to explain about Chris, to try to salvage whatever was left of our marriage. But instead of honesty, I chose deflection. "I don't know what you mean," I said, finally looking at him directly. Daniel studied my face for a long moment, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through me. When he spoke again, his voice was so quiet, I almost didn't hear him. "Okay then." He got in his car and drove away, leaving me standing alone in the parking garage with the weight of my lies pressing down on my chest like a stone. The law office of Henderson, Mills and Associates occupied the entire 15th floor of a downtown building that smelled like leather and expensive coffee. I sat in the reception area, my hands trembling as I tried to make sense of the formal letter that had arrived at my office that morning. "Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Henderson will see you now." The receptionist's voice seemed to come from very far away. I followed her down a hallway lined with diplomas and awards, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. Daniel was already seated at a conference table when I entered the room, flanked by a gray-haired man in an expensive suit and a woman I didn't recognize. The woman was younger than me, maybe 27, with auburn hair and kind eyes. She sat close enough to Daniel that their shoulders almost touched. "Amy," Daniel said quietly, not standing when I entered. "Thank you for coming." "What is this?" I asked, my voice sounding shrill in the formal setting. "Daniel, what's going on?" Mr. Henderson gestured to a chair across from them. "Please, Mrs. Patterson, have a seat. We have several matters to discuss." I sank into the chair, my mind racing. The formal letter had mentioned something about dissolution of marriage and custody arrangements, but I'd been too shocked to process the details. This couldn't be happening. Not like this. "Daniel," I said, looking directly at my husband, "can we please talk about this privately? Whatever's wrong, we can work it out." Daniel's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Amy, I think it's better if we handle this properly, with legal representation." "Legal representation?" The words came out as a whisper. "Daniel, I'm your wife." Mr. Henderson opened a thick folder and spread several documents across the table. "Mrs. Patterson, my client has filed for divorce on grounds of adultery and abandonment of marital responsibilities. We have substantial evidence supporting these claims." "Evidence?" I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air in a room that suddenly felt too small. What evidence? I haven't done anything wrong. The lawyer slid a manila envelope across the table. With shaking hands, I opened it and felt my world collapse. Photographs. Dozens of them. Me and Chris at the coffee shop, laughing over shared dessert. Me and Chris walking through the park, his hand on my lower back. Me and Chris sitting in his car outside my office building, leaning close together in conversation. But it wasn't just photographs. There were printed text messages. Every flirtatious exchange, every secret meeting arrangement, every complaint I'd made about Daniel to Chris. Phone records showing the frequency of our calls. Even a copy of the hospital visitor log from the day I'd introduced Chris to my family. This isn't what it looks like, I said desperately. We didn't. Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Henderson interrupted gently. We also have testimony from several witnesses who observed your behavior over the past 2 months. Your sister, your mother, your best friend Sarah, and several co-workers have all expressed concern about your relationship with Mr. Christopher Mills. My sister, my mother, Sarah. They'd all been talking to Daniel's lawyer, sharing their observations, their worries, their suspicions. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd thought possible. Daniel, I pleaded, please, let me explain. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I was lonely, and you were so distant, and I just needed someone to pay attention to me. For the first time since I'd entered the room, Daniel spoke directly to me. Amy, I know exactly what happened. I've known for 6 weeks. 6 weeks? The timeline hit me like a physical blow. But you never said anything. You never confronted me. I wanted to be sure, Daniel replied calmly. I wanted to have all the facts before I made any decisions. All those mysterious phone calls, the secret meetings, the paperwork, the strange behavior. Daniel hadn't been having an affair or planning a surprise. He'd been building a case against me. The custody arrangement is non-negotiable, Mr. Henderson continued, pulling out another set of documents. Given Mrs. Patterson's recent behavior and her demonstrated inability to prioritize her family responsibilities, my client will retain primary custody of Emma. Emma? I looked around the room in confusion. We don't have any children. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Amy, you've been so focused on your new relationship that you forgot. We've been in the adoption process for 8 months. Emma, Jenny's baby, her birth mother changed her mind about the adoption. Jenny and Mark asked us to take her. The room spun around me. The baby at the hospital, the one I'd barely paid attention to while I was showing off Chris, was supposed to be our daughter. The adoption Daniel had been working on, the personal projects he'd mentioned, the late nights and secret phone calls, it had all been about bringing home our child, and I'd brought another man to meet her. I don't understand, I whispered. The paperwork was finalized yesterday, Daniel continued, his voice steady, but his eyes showing the first hint of emotion I'd seen. Emma comes home next week. But given your recent choices, the court has awarded me sole custody with supervised visitation rights for you. The woman sitting beside Daniel reached over and placed her hand gently on his arm. The gesture was subtle, supportive, and completely devastating. This is Claire, Daniel said quietly. She's been helping me navigate the adoption process. She's also a family law attorney, and she'll be representing me in the divorce proceedings. Claire. The woman who'd been there for Daniel while I'd been busy seeking validation from another man. The woman who'd helped him prepare for fatherhood while I'd been complaining about feeling neglected. Daniel, please, I said, tears streaming down my face. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work it out. Please don't take our daughter away from me. Amy, Daniel said, and for the first time his voice cracked slightly. You brought him to meet our daughter. Our daughter. Do you understand what that means? The weight of what I'd done crashed over me like a tidal wave. I hadn't just betrayed my husband. I'd brought my affair partner to meet the child we were supposed to raise together. I'd introduced him to my family as a friend while secretly planning to continue seeing him behind Daniel's back. "I'm sorry," I sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know about Emma. You never told me the adoption was moving forward." "I tried to tell you," Daniel replied quietly. "For weeks I tried to share what was happening. But you were always distracted, always somewhere else, always with him." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Patterson, the divorce papers are straightforward. Given the documented evidence of adultery, my client is entitled to a significant portion of the marital assets. However, he's willing to be reasonable if you sign the custody agreement without contest." I looked around the room, at the lawyer with his neat stacks of evidence, at Claire with her supportive presence, at Daniel with his broken trust and careful composure. This wasn't a negotiation. This was the consequence of every choice I'd made over the past 2 months. "What about Chris?" I asked weakly. "Have you told him about this?" Daniel and Claire exchanged a look. "Mr. Mills was informed yesterday that you're married," Claire said gently. "He was surprised. Apparently you'd told him you were separated and in the process of divorcing." Another lie, another betrayal. Chris had probably run for the hills the moment he realized I'd been deceiving him too. "He's not returning your calls," Daniel added quietly, "in case you were wondering." I signed the papers with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. Every signature felt like another piece of my life being stripped away. My marriage, my home, my daughter, my future. As I stood to leave, Daniel spoke one last time. "Amy, I want you to know that I loved you. I loved you enough to fight for our marriage, to try to build a family with you, to give you every opportunity to be honest with me. But I won't let you hurt Emma the way you hurt me." I walked out of that office and into the bright afternoon sunlight, leaving behind everything I'd thought I wanted and everything I'd actually needed. The street was full of people going about their normal lives, unaware that mine had just ended. 6 months later, I see Daniel and Claire at the grocery store sometimes, pushing Emma in her stroller, looking like the family I was supposed to be part of. They're always polite when we cross paths, and Daniel updates me on Emma's milestones during our supervised visits. But I lost the right to be her mother the day I chose validation over commitment, excitement over stability, lies over love. I sit alone in my studio apartment now, surrounded by the consequences of my choices, finally understanding what Sarah meant when she warned me I was going to get burned. Some fires don't just burn you. They consume everything you thought you couldn't live without, leaving you with nothing but the bitter knowledge that you lit the match yourself. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.